Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Oliver Cann, Head of Strategic Communications here at the World Economic Forum. Welcome to those of you joining us in the room. It's cold, day one of the annual meeting 2019. It's great to lure you away from the warmth of the Congress Centre. Warm welcome to those of you watching online on weforum.org and our Twitter feed at WEF. Great to have as many people watching this important session as possible. It's about technology, a common good. An emerging subject over the past 12 months, I think we could all agree. The internet was built, of course, on the utopian dream of ubiquitous information for all, but as market power has become ever more concentrated, more and more people are questioning this. So the question is, does its future lie as a commons providing public good and sustenance in the same way that parks and public spaces do in the real world? Got a couple of really interesting people to discuss this with us. First of all, Guy Standing, Professorial Research Associate at SOAS University in London, co-founder and now co-president of BN, the Basic Income Earth Network, member of the UK's Progressive Economy Forum. Recent books include The Corruption of Capitalism and Plunder of the Commons, a manifesto for sharing public wealth, and a much appreciated contributor to our agenda platform as well. Guy, thanks for joining us today. Sheila Warren, you are the head of our blockchain and digital ledger technology practice at the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the World Economic Forum in San Francisco. Prior to that, you are a lawyer who's worked in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So, Guy, I think we should start with you, because we know well your views here, and I think we should, in the short period of time we have in this session, just get to the interesting part as soon as possible. So, you're very active and very eloquently arguing for a return of the digital space to one of being a public commons. How are you going to make it work?
I think it's important to see the commons as a generic issue. Throughout history, we've valued the commons. And we've had three types of property: private property, state property, and commons. Mm-hmm. And right back to the Magna Carta and the Charter of the Forest of 1217, a commons was regarded as a vital part of a good society. And access to the commons by the commoners was regarded as fundamental. I've written this book about the corruption of capitalism, and there's a chapter about how, in the neoliberal era, we've seen a systematic plunder of all five types of commons. The five types begin with natural commons, like the air, the water, the land, and natural resources. And they include social commons, inherited amenities, and so on. They include civil commons, the right to due process, access to common law. They include cultural commons, and they include what I've called the knowledge commons. And what we're talking about this afternoon is what's happened to the knowledge commons. But I think it's very important to see it in toto, because the technological changes that we've been seeing have allowed the systematic plunder of other types of commons. And that's a key point. The technologies have included the ability to enclose, the traditional idea of enclosure, taking away the commons for a particular interest. They've included the enabling of private entities to commodify aspects of the commons, to privatize, and most importantly, to colonize the various commons. Now, I'll elaborate that just for a second, because what I've done in the book, the new book, is divide the type of commons into these five types, and then look at the fifth type, the knowledge commons, in terms of information commons, intellectual commons, and education commons. And your concern this afternoon is fundamentally with the information commons and the intellectual commons. Now, the information commons, if you think about it historically, has allowed for access to information. And traditionally, the information commons were the libraries, the universities, the newspapers. That allowed for local control, diversity of opinion, all sorts of interactions with nobody in control. What's happened with this technological revolution that we're undergoing now is we've seen systematically the emergence of the big five. The big five being Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft. Now, between those five, they are dominating the information commons. As we all know, we all use it all the time. And you have to think about those five becoming the big imperial powers of technology. And in the last 10 years, they've bought up over 500 other firms. If there's a potential competitor that emerges, they buy them up. And in buying them up, they buy up the intellectual property rights, and it gives them scalability, gives them network economies of scale, it gives them control, and it enables them to dominate what information is supplied. We all know the billions of people who are accessing the information system, but of course, these big five are determining what we get, how we get it, and don't forget what we don't get. And they're doing it in a way that is imperial in ambition. In the book, I quote Mark Zuckerberg. And Mark Zuckerberg has injudiciously said, well, Facebook is more like a government than a firm. Well, we have words for that in reacting to that. But of course, they're correct, because they're determining what information goes, how it goes, and then, of course, what they do with the data, our data. Now, our data are part of the commons. What you supply information, what I supply information, we are supplying information for free. They are turning the data that we provide into rentier income. Billions of dollars for which they are hardly taxed at all. And that is the first big crunch for rentier capitalism, because we should be saying, wait a minute, that's part of our commons. We should be having the income. You are exploiting us for free, and we're not making any money. You are making money out of what we're doing. That's a very important part. The second part that I really worry about is that the way they are manipulating the information system, it's addictive. It's really addictive. And there's a wonderful quotation from a famous Nobel-winning economist, Herbert Simon, who said, well, what are we losing with all the information that's getting up? What we're losing is attention. We are suffering from an attention deficit syndrome, so that we cannot actually avoid the addiction. And it was a lovely quote I've also put there from Netflix, the CEO of Netflix. He says, well, our biggest competitor is not YouTube or Amazon, it's sleep. We want to sell as much as we can, and we are manipulating people. Now, we're seeing a process where the commons is being lost. It's being commercialized and controlled by a handful of plutocrats and plutocratic corporations. And note, they're all based in one country and in one part of the country. So we're seeing a colonization of what information we get. And they choose that, and that's a big controlling aspect of the loss of the information commons. But then there's a bigger scandal. And the bigger scandal must force people at the World Economic Forum to look in the mirror. Because what we've seen in the last 25 years is the construction of the most unfree market economy in history. Fact. Since the passage of TRIPS in 1994, the United States has globalized the intellectual property rights system. So that before 1995, fewer than 1 million patents were filed all over the world. In 2016, over 3 million were filed. There are now 12 million patents in force. Each and every patent guarantees a monopoly income to the patent holder. And these big companies, big tech companies, have been hoovering up thousands and thousands of patents, stringing them together, and making billions and billions of rental income. So it's destroying the income distribution system. And it's supported by chief executives of major multinational corporations, which I'll come back to later, which have cemented this system. And there's only one problem, and I'll end on this point, which is that in each technological revolution, the geopolitical center of gravity has shifted. In the early part of the 20th century, it shifted from Europe to the United States. At the time, Europeans were complaining that the United States was stealing their intellectual property. Very symbolically, President Andrew Jackson in the 19th century, he described a certain Englishman, Samuel Slater, as the father of the American Industrial Revolution. Why? Because they paid him to steal industrial secrets from Britain. Now we have a Donald Trump saying the Chinese are doing it to the United States. It's an exercise in hypocrisy because the Chinese have woken up and are now filing more patents than the United States and South Korea and Japan and Europe put together. So we have a real crisis where the encroachment of the two types of commons we're talking about is leading to a rentier capitalist system where it's just sucking more and more income out. And it's a major economic crisis.
And there's a lot of social as well as economic ills you're putting at the doors of the technology industry here. The fact is we're losing sleep because Netflix provides us with good programming. The fact is that people don't seem to mind giving away their data because they like using the internet, maybe because it's very innovative. And it's also creating lots of growth and lots of employment for people as well. So how do you overcome that?
Well, I think we've got to realize that while they're providing these goods, they are also extracting a vast amount of income. I don't think the ordinary person understands just how much they're extracting in rental profits. And if they did, they would be far more angry. And that anger is growing because the awareness that we are having our data used for all sorts of purposes, including invasion of privacy, including panopticon state stuff. And of course, the worst case is what's happening in China with the social credit development, but where they're using this high-tech information to monitor behavior and say, okay, if you're a goodie, don't worry. But if you're a baddie, you will not take a single step, as the term they've used, without being surveyed. And it's the same in the West. It's a global problem. So I think some of the goodies that we're getting don't go along with all the negative incursions that we have to face.
Interestingly, allow me to plug the opinion poll that we commissioned last week ahead of this meeting, where we thought it would be an interesting exercise to see what people around the world, from every region, from every demographic range, from every socio-economic strata, men and women, thought of the issues that we think about here at the World Economic Forum, we lose sleep over. 48% of global respondents, 10,000 people survey, believed that technology did more good than harm, and 52% believe that technology was more harm than good. So that's ticked over. It's the first year we've done that, but I would imagine that's maybe the first time that has ticked over. I don't want to spend too much longer describing the situation. I want to get to the heart of it, which is actually how to fix it, because I think you've hit on a very important point, which is it's pretty complicated. I read an article in Wired a couple of weeks ago where the journalist tried to actually sell his data and found out ways of doing it and realised after a couple of days of effort he made about 30 cents or something. Yeah. And I haven't got the exact numbers, but it was a fascinating and entertaining article, and it shows you just how difficult it is. But Sheila, I want to bring you in now because you're based in the part of the world where a lot of this concentration is happening. You've worked in Silicon Valley, you now work for us, and you're heading a practice which is, has been touted by many, blockchain and distributed ledger technology as being possibly an answer to creating a fairer, much more surveillable and traceable and transparent internet.
Yeah, well, I think you've certainly painted a fairly bleak picture of the state of the commons, particularly of the knowledge commons, as you put it, and the information commons. And I think the important thing to recognize as well is that none of that is necessarily irreversible. And I think that's something that's not broadly understood. There is this sense of inevitability now that our data is out there in the flow, it's all over, it's done. It's this kind of, we're in the Black Mirror world already, so why even bother trying to extricate from that? I don't think that this continuation of this sort of path is inevitable. And I do feel that blockchain and distributed ledger technologies offer one avenue when combined specifically with some of the other fourth industrial revolution technologies that we focus on here at the forum to provide us a pathway or different models or ways of thinking about how we extricate from the situation in which we find ourselves. Now, I will say as a 15-year resident of Silicon Valley, someone who has moved around different parts of the valley as well, I would certainly say I operate in a world of highly informed consumers and highly of these different platforms, many of which you've discussed. And I will tell you, as somebody who worked a lot as a privacy lawyer in my prior to the forum world, I am one of the better situated people to understand exactly what it means when I go to a website and the cookie notice comes up, and I know exactly what it means to check on each of those boxes. And there are definitely times that even someone as sophisticated a consumer as I, relatively speaking, just don't actually think it's worth it to go through the exercise of undoing whatever it is that's happening. And part of that, I feel, is, like you say, I think fairly, a lack of awareness of what is actually happening, or a lack of, on the part of the average consumer, like what is actually happening with this data? Why am I not, could I possibly realize a stream of income from it? How would I even monetize it if I wanted to? And it's sort of like this Wire journalist explored. One of the things I think we're looking at with blockchain is this concept of micropayments and microcredit accounting. So would there be a mechanism for actually creating a stream of income, of monetizing information that I am willingly and knowingly providing, but with the expectation that there would be some sort of flow of value from that, from which I personally or my family or whoever I chose to allocate that revenue would benefit? And this is one of the promises, I think, of this technology because of certain aspects of it. Now, I think we have to be very reasonable and pragmatic about the state of these new technologies. Unlike some which are more advanced, we're a little further along with machine learning, for example. IoT is a bit further along. Blockchain remains a very early stage technology. And so a lot of these economic models are being developed. And part of what we're focusing on at the forum, and particularly at the center in our San Francisco office, is really thinking about what can we learn from the mistakes, some deliberate, some inadvertent, I think if we're fair to some of the creators of these platforms. Some of these were just errors of judgment, or perhaps not having the foresight to think through the path and what might occur down the line. But if we look at that and we say, how might we do better with these new opportunities? I think we have an opportunity to really create a technical infrastructure that will lead to a more inclusive ecosystem. And I'm quite bullish on that prospect. I do feel that we have a lot more awareness now, particularly at the regulatory level. Because let's not forget that there were willing partners in a lot of the work that happened around some of this, let's just name it, exploitation of data, for example. There were willing partners and regulators that allowed things like patent systems to be developed, right? This didn't happen in a vacuum. There were government participants, there were social participants, there were individual creators, there were academic institutions, there were a lot of other actors in these ecosystems that set up and created these structures. It wasn't just the entrepreneurial innovator who came in with a mindset of colonization and created single-handedly these environments, right? So I think it's important to think through how might we evaluate some of the differences in what we now know and create new models that could serve us better.
I agree with much of what you said. I think the awareness of the severity of this rentier capitalism has to be appreciated. I quoted the CEO of Pfizer, okay, who was one of the architects of TRIPS, okay? This was passed in 1994 and was dominated by a handful of big tech, big pharma, big finance,
yes.
Americans. Okay? And he boasted, he said, our combined strength allowed us to establish a global private sector government network to lay the ground for what became TRIPS. Now this, if you like, was an intellectual capture. Because if you introduce a system where you can have 20-year patents, globalized, 40 years in the case of pharma, you are creating the capture of rental income to an extraordinary degree. So I take your point that this is not irreversible, but we've got to do something very urgently. We've got to roll back patents. There's no justification for giving a corporation a 20-year patent, a monopoly profit, for a piece of research which has been publicly funded by taxpayers like you and me, right? That's the majority case.
We're in agreement.
And therefore we should say maximum 5 years. All right, that's a very simple thing. Similarly with copyright. It used to be that if copyright was taken out, it used to be for 14 years.
Yes.
Now, copyright gives ownership, a monopoly ownership for the whole of a life of a person plus 70 years.
Yeah.
This is disgusting. It's obscene.
I'm cutting half time because we've got to. I think we've painted a pretty accurate picture. I want to spend a bit of time now on what's the roadmap out of here. If it is the most unfree market economy in history, it's the most unsuccessful commons in history because nobody's really trying to make it better. When I started using internet in 1990s, it was already in that mindset and in the movie.
But Bernard Lees is doing. I mean, he's doing some very good.
But let's see if there are any questions from the audience. Okay, gentleman in the front row.
Yeah, hi there. I'm James Tumudi. Hi there, James Tumudi. I'm with a company called Sendle, but I'm also the co-chair of the Digital Economy and Society Council with the Forum. I think this is a really fascinating thread. And I think one of the most interesting pieces is what can we learn? We've protected commons in other domains, absolutely, as you very much said, whether it's the oceans or the atmosphere or space or whatever. What mechanisms exist in those other more physical domains that we could actually start to translate into the concept of, say, the digital, the data commons? You talked about, rent taxes, but I'm sure there's lots of other mechanisms that exist. What are they?
The interesting, if I may come back, that's good, very good question. In my book, I look at how the commons have been lost historically and how they've been defended. And always defense has taken the place of having stewards in place, people or institutions that act as stewards, which are governing the system, and, very importantly, gatekeepers. The gatekeepers are the voice of the commoners that exists. Now, what I'm proposing in the book is a charter of the commons, where we say, look, we cannot get rid of all these rentier practices, but we can say we've got to put levies on all of these practices and build up a commons fund from which we could pay out dividends to everybody. And I think the Canadians have just hit on that with their eco-tax system, whereas Macron singularly failed to understand that if you're going to have levies on extraction of the commons, in this case toxic air, then you've got to give dividends to people to compensate. The Canadians have got it right, and it's a popular policy. Macron got it wrong, and the Gilets jaunes has taken over. So I think there's a very good lesson just there.
Yeah, and I think there are lots of ways of thinking about how we account for externalities in any kind of economic system, and there are different models for that, including taxes among them. But I actually find very interesting, something we're exploring a bit, is native and tribal communities, and how the setup culturally and psychologically and socially is one of protection of the heart of the community. And so I do think there's this psychological and cultural shift that I think I effectively notes. We haven't quite gotten there yet. There's a fear and a paranoia more than even a fear, but there isn't yet this full-hearted acceptance that this is an important part of the commons. It's a different way of thinking about clean air, clean water. And I think people don't understand necessarily that if there isn't a physical effect, you think about what happened in Flint, Michigan around water, and suddenly everyone's paying attention in America to water. That was not a conversation we were having in the same way. There were activists and certain stewards, for example, who were pushing that conversation, but until there was a crisis around it, we didn't get that sort of cultural acceptance about the importance of that particular utility. And so similarly, I think when you think about information or knowledge or data, particularly personal data, people, apart from in the healthcare space, don't necessarily think of it as something that has value in that same way. So there is a need to think through how we affect that transition, and I would think that would be almost a precursor to even regulatory kinds of policies around financial incentivization.
Do you need a Flint moment to get this all started?
It's a great question. I think that when you really do explore the water conversation in America, just dwell on that for a moment, and you think about how fundamentally that has shifted the conversation around that particular commons in this particular country. You know, it certainly is a catalyst that spurs the conversation and spurs more innovation and experimentation in this space.
And Guy, we were talking earlier about, and you mentioned students totally get it. They get their data being exploited, but they still use Snapchat, they still use Instagram.
Yeah, I'm not against the technology. I don't want to be giving that impression. The technological advances are wonderful. It's the control and the rent extraction process.
The centralization.
And the control and the fact that, you know, you can get your Cambridge Analytica or the equivalent distorting our democracies.
So do we need a moment for
I think that's come already. I mean, you mentioned, I think, for example, in Britain, the privatization of water has led to a most incredible short-term exploitation, where it's just been exposed that one of the privatized companies, which is owned by private equity foreign companies, have been tipping millions and millions of tons of untreated sewage into our national river, the Thames. And they got slapped over the wrist when they pleaded guilty, $20 million fine when they're giving their dividends of £1.6 billion. So it was a pivotal moment. When I talk about that at groups across Britain, they say that should be in the public ownership in some way, okay? Not old-style nationalization, perhaps, but at least with a commons ownership. And I'd just like to respond to one point you made, because I think the next point I'm going to make is going to be a huge subject over the next 5 years. We're not aware to the extent to which the oceans are being plundered. And it's an extraordinary development that the blue commons are being lost. And we have marine genetic species and things which are being patented around the world. And extraordinarily, there's one company which has 47% of all the patents that have multiplied on access to ocean resources. One company. And 3 countries own 75% of all the patents. Okay? And one research institute has more patents than all the rest of the world. Now here we have a monopolistic situation on the commons, which is going to be a huge source of growth and welfare or bad fare in the future. We just listened to Sir David Attenborough, and what is happening to the oceans with intellectual property rights developing is a sort of quiet story which is building up. And I think it's going to be a really important subject.
Well, as a Californian, I can tell you it's an active conversation on the coastal communities. We certainly talk a lot about everything from erosion to ocean plundering, and it's definitely a heightened awareness of the problems there. I think one of the things that's concerning a lot of American businesses and politicians is antitrust laws and regulations. Sure. And we're certainly seeing an erosion in antitrust enforcement, and this leads to, one would almost argue, natural monopolistic behavior by institutions or entities who are really trying to engage in this capture and this rent extraction. And I think that one mechanism that's been quite effective in the past at preventing some of that has been antitrust law. And so we are looking a little bit to those kinds of models to say, at what point in time could you create a trigger and what should that look like? And I think what's happened is that trigger has shifted. And now the bar to being seen as a monopolistic actor by regulators in many parts of the world is so high that by the time you're actually triggering any sort of enforcement action, it's almost too late in a way, which I think is deeply problematic. And some of this is reflected in the political realities. And this is part of what I think we're seeing in the rise of populism, is the sense of the unfairness of that and the lack of protection by those in power of those who are powerless.
3 minutes left, so the risk of alienating our audience, I can't see any hands up, so let's go for action plan. You've talked about the next 5 years is becoming much more important. What do you want to see happening in 2019, Guy?
I want to see more and more countries establishing sovereign wealth funds, but as common funds, and building up the base of these funds with levies on commercial use of our commons, starting with the air. Okay, the toxic air that we're experiencing demands carbon taxes, demands much greater eco-taxes of all sorts. We can only have such taxes if the proceeds of the taxes are used to pay out as dividends. But you can only do that as building up a commons fund, like the Alaska Permanent Fund, like the Norwegian Fund. And I don't think we can have nano payments for people who are using their computers. That has moral hazards for a start, because you would pay someone, okay, the more I use it, the more I'll get. And instead of 3 cents, I'll get 10 cents. Well, this is absurd. But if we built up a fund where we could say, as we built it up, and the dividends could be paid out on social investments, ecologically desirable investments, then that, I think, is a viable short-term and long-term future. And it would work.
And the greatest challenge you're going to face this year?
The greatest challenge at the moment is to get this, I think, the fuel tax and dividends into the thing. That's why I think we should all be celebrating what's been done in Canada. We should be celebrating that there's a cross-party movement in the US Congress for movements in this direction, finally. And I think that in other countries, green movements have latched on to this, and I think it's an essential thing, and it's really, really urgent.
Sheila.
Yeah, I'd like to see the tech sector itself actually play a strong hand in dismantling some of these systems. I think it's possible. I think there's will to do it. I think there's public pressure to do it. And I think it's a matter of the intention that's paid to these things. And I think that blockchain technology, for an example, is a way of starting to address some of these concerns, starting to address some of the monopoly behavior, starting to address some of the lack of transparency. And so I think embracing some of these technologies really with a mindset towards inclusion and towards correcting some of the mistakes, again, whether deliberate or inadvertent, that have happened in the past, is something I would love to see that sector lead the way.
Okay, well, that's an interesting juncture to leave it. We'll have to see next year, but certainly an important subject. And interestingly, we're doing a tour of the Commons. This morning we were talking about civil society and the civil commons, and in about an hour's time we'll be talking about the oceans as well. So let's see if there are any best practices that we can share along the way. Thank you so much for joining us for this really important session. Thank you for joining us here in the room. Thank you for watching us live online.
Thank you.